Nice to be with you. It's your Mora Omanut Eva, and today we are doing a quilting project, and we're going to be thinking about the ways that materials tell stories. So we're going to start by reading this story called The Keeping Quilt. When my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots she had worn for farm work. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry, and it was so crowded, not like in back home Russia. But all the same, it was their home, and most of their neighbors were just like them. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into shallow water. Shh, shh, shh. In 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them too. The only things she had left of back home Russia were her dress and the babushka she liked to throw up in the air when she was dancing. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a new one, she took her old dress and babushka. Then from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havala's nightdress, and an apron of Aunt Natasha's. "We will make a quilt to help us always remember home," Anna's mother said. "It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night." And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies as they needed them. The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family ate challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. To show he wanted to be her husband, he gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of rock salt, and all tied into a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower for love, and the salt so their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky. They were engaged. Under the wedding chuppah, Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. When my grandma Carla was born, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carla was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold so she would never know poverty, a flower so she would always know love, salt so her life would always have flavor, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carla learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do washing. "Married you'll be someday," Anna told Carla, and again the quilt became a wedding chuppah, this time for Carla's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. In Carla's wedding bouquet was a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carla and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and great-grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She had grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a kehillah, a rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. When great-grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now grown up. When Mary Ellen left home, she took the quilt with her. When she became a bride, the quilt became her chuppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit, but in her bouquet were gold, bread, and salt. The quilt welcomed me, Patricia, into the world, and it was the tablecloth for my first birthday party. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve had made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. The quilt was a pretend cape when I was in the bull ring, or sometimes a tent in the steaming Amazon jungle. At my wedding to Enzo Mario, men and women danced together. In my bouquet were gold, bread, and salt, and a sprinkle of wine, so I would always know laughter. 20 years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. Someday she too will leave home, and she will take the quilt with her. I hope you liked that story as much as I do. So in this story, the little Anna moves from her homeland in Russia to America, and she just has her dress and her babushka, her shawl, and her whole family comes together, gets all their old clothes that they've grown out of or that got old and worn out, and they make a special quilt together that then gets passed down to their children and their children's children and their children's children's children, right? And will continue. And so embedded in that quilt is the story of their immigration, right? Of their family's journey from home, Russia, to their new home, America. And I want you to ask yourself the question, if you were to leave your homeland and go on a big journey very far away, what would you bring with you? Maybe it's a special object, maybe it's a family heirloom, or maybe it's just something that's really special to you personally. Maybe it's a story, maybe it's a song, maybe it is a food. So we're doing this project this week because the Torah portion, the parshah, is Lech Lecha, which is basically where God tells Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai as they were called, to leave their homeland to, God says, to a land that I will show you. And I just love that phrase, you shall be a blessing. Like, we are all a blessing, and how can we, really spread that around and really share that with others. So one way to do that is through art. So I made this paper quilt, and as you can see, a quilt is made up of different pieces put together. So like a patchwork quilt is like different squares or triangles or different shapes that are then put together into one big piece. So you can see that I did that with little squares and rectangles that are kind of similar in shape, and made them into one big rectangle. And I put Lech Lecha, what God said to Abraham and Sarah in Lech Lecha, on the sides as a sort of border to my quilt. So I did this with paper, and this was easy to do. I used papers that I had scraps of lying around, so some watercolored papers and some special painted papers that were made for an art project with some of you guys, some of you preschoolers, I think it was, that I just love and are special to me, that you, my students, made. So I wanted to use those. So I invite you to look around to see what materials you have lying around. I also invite you to make a real fabric quilt if you like to sew. That would be so amazing. I just wanted to show you a couple more examples of different quilts. So these are the quilts of Gee's Bend, and their ancestors were slaves in America, and they would use all of their old clothing rags to make quilts, and this tradition was passed down through their generations, and so they continue to do this, and they're just the most beautiful, I think, quilts ever. And I also wanted to show you, found this book somewhere. It's a very old 70s quilting book, but just some ideas for you for the applique, which are the pictures. So let's get started. Are you ready? So you're gonna start with a square. And now you can either just make one big square, or you can cut up your square into smaller rectangles and squares if you want to make more than one image. So now you're just going to sketch out your images of the things that you would bring with you, or the things that you would want to pass down to your children. And I'm just keeping it really simple shapes, as simple as I possibly can. And I'm filling up the entire area. So now I'm going to make cutouts of each individual shape in each of my pictures. So as you can see, I am tracing the lines that I made on my drawing and making the individual shape cutouts. And now I am, with the dark blue, I'm making the cutout of the background, the rectangle. So I just traced the paper, and now I'm gluing the shapes onto the background. And I'm just gonna keep doing this. You can trace your shapes onto your colored paper by just placing it on top of your colored paper and outlining it, tracing it with your pencil, and just pressing pretty hard so that there's a nice indent that you can see on your colored paper that you can then cut out. So you can see I have all different papers, painted papers and marbled papers. So just look around, see what you have. And now I'm making my background that's going to be like the background fabric that all the pieces are going to go on. So I just took some cardboard and then glued the black background papers onto it. And now I'm arranging all the squares so that they line up and then gluing them on. And I actually had to put some heavy books on them to really get them to stick. So now you can go and add little details with a pen or a marker if you want. So I added some grass and some veins to the leaves and some eyes and legs to my animals. And then you can add a background to a border, I mean. You can add a border. So all quilts have borders, so my border was just plain black, but I added some stars because God told Abraham that to look at the stars and see how numerous they were, and that he would have that many descendants, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. And I just love looking at the stars. So I put that, and then I put the text, the verse from Genesis, Lech Lecha, that we are studying. So it says, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." You can also put your name here, or names of your family members, whatever you want to put on your border. All right, Amanim, thanks so much for joining me, and I can't wait to see what you decide to bring with you on your big journey into the future. And please upload pictures or videos into our shared photo album. I'd really love to see it. And thanks, y'all. Bye.